All things to all men. When we hear this phrase, we think of two-faced gossips or slick marketing men or political spin doctors. Actually, Paul is speaking about a ministry philosophy of deep integrity. He's talking about a flexibility that seeks to honor something far deeper than cultural expressions. In 1 Corinthians chapter 9, the apostle is laying bare his modus operandi. He is discussing how it is that he can move so freely from one culture to the next, from stern religionists in the synagogue, to free-thinking philosophers in Athens, to the common people in the marketplace. In every situation, he adopts cultural practices that are appropriate. He is all things to all men. Why? Is he a people-pleasing chameleon? Does he not know who he is? Actually, it's because he does know his true identity that Paul is so able to adapt. Because he belongs to Christ, he is free from the claims of culture, and so he can be flexible. Yet, being flexible, being free, he uses that freedom to serve others. That's the secret of his adaptability. 1 Corinthians chapter 9 from verse 19. Though I am free and belong to no man, I make myself a slave to everyone to win as many as possible. To the Jews I became like a Jew to win the Jews. To those under the law I became like one under the law, though I myself am not under the law, so as to win those under the law. To those not having the law I became like one not having the law, though I am not free from God's law, but am under Christ's law, so as to win those not having the law. To the weak I became weak to win the weak. I have become all things to all men so that by all possible means I might save some. I do this for the sake of the gospel, that I may share in its blessings. Let me ask you a question. What does a Christian look like? The scandal is, everyone knows what a Christian looks like. Ned Flanders, right? Christians look like, white, middle-class, suburban, university-educated, sanctimonious, and deeply irritating. Isn't that what a Christian looks like? Of course, statistically, that is absolute nonsense. I mean, within my own denomination, Anglicanism, the average worshipper is a 20-something Nigerian woman who has to travel more than 2 miles to get clean water. That's the average Anglican around the world. But nonetheless, the stereotype of what a Christian looks like persists. And it is a scandal because the gospel stands above culture. You see, you actually can't answer the question, what does a Christian look like? You might ask, what does a Christian act like? And then you get the answer, they act like Jesus. More specifically, a Christian acts like the Jesus who hung out with prostitutes, publicans, and sinners, even as he mingles with the Pharisees and preaches in the synagogues. You see, Jesus was all things to all men, that some might be saved. That's why Paul follows his example. That doesn't mean that to be all things to all people, that we just are all spin and no substance. You see, even when Paul enters deeply into another culture, there is still something ruling Paul. In verse 21, he says he's not free from God's law, but he is enlawed by Christ. That's literally how you could translate it. He's enlawed. Not that Christ is like the in-laws, that would not be a good thing, but it's the idea of Paul being put into Christ so deeply that Christ is his new ruler, his law, if you like. Christ himself is the ruling authority in Paul's life. Christ has enlawed Paul. So Paul has not just cast off every rule and authority. He is ruled. He has a center. He has integrity. It's Jesus. But that means that Paul could never say, I became a drug dealer in order to win drug dealers, or I became a sex worker in order to win sex workers. But it will mean some people saying, I hang out with drug dealers to win drug dealers. I hang out with sex workers to win sex workers. But why? Why go through all this cultural adaptation and sensitivity and flexibility? It's so much easier to stick with people like us, isn't it? That's why we do it all the time. We strongly gravitate towards people like us. When we've walked into a room, we've assessed those present in a nanosecond. Without even thinking about it, we strike up a conversation with people our own age, our own race, our own tax bracket, our own sense of humor, our own fashion sense. We've made those calculations at the speed of thought and we slot instantly into cliques. because we crave acceptance. We deeply want to belong. And it's exhausting crossing social and cultural boundaries. So how does Paul do it? How does he cross those cultural and social boundaries? Well, first he knows that he is unshakably one of the in crowd. Paul uses the phrase "in Christ" over 150 times in his letters. That is the ultimate inner circle to belong to, and Paul is constantly reminding himself and his readers that we are in with regards to the one club that really counts. If the Father Almighty accepts us in the Beloved, as Ephesians 1 verse 6 puts it, then we are free from the need for acceptance with others. But more than this, in verse 23, Paul lets us in on his motivation. He says, "I do all this for the sake of the gospel, that I may share in its blessings." Paul does not want to enjoy the gospel on his own. His vision of the future is to sit at Christ's table with the religious and the irreligious, the moral and the immoral, the Jews and the cultured Greeks and the barbarians alike. With that goal in mind, Paul reaches out with a gospel that is big enough to meet and change anyone. Who do you want to sit down with on that last day? Jesus has crossed the ultimate barrier to offer salvation to you. He has become all things to all people. He has become us in offering us the gospel. And his blood has paid for every tribe, language, people, and tongue. He has been so flexible at the cost of his own life just to offer us salvation. Today, we can join him in reaching out. So then let us lay aside our own cultural sensitivities, our own identities, our own masks, our own labels that we invest in. Can we cross those boundaries? Can we become all things to all men, so that by all possible means we may save some?